Right, hello. Welcome to Sisyphus Complex Solution. This is episode 179 called Monolith. I was probably going to call one of the episodes in the audit of the MOD that name, so might as well be this one. So let's get into the particular office that I'm going to be auditing this week. And what we get is the Single Source Regulations Office, and as per usual I'll just give a brief of the financial audit first. Start with the benchmark period of 2019 to 2020, and they are basically a taxpayer burden to the extent of 6,336,000, with a cost of employment at 68%. And for anybody that's been here before, you know I always start with the average salary as well, but this time the office produces a number itself. Unfortunately, their number is total bullshit. So I'm going to run through each of the 5 years of the false claims that they make within their annual reports. So you'll be able to see the figures that I calculate it at on the screen, but for the year 2019 to 2020, they're claiming a median salary of £72,637, whereas in reality you can see it's £108,475. For 2020-21 they claim £69,438 as opposed to £118,729. 2021 to 2022 they claim 69,571 instead of over 122,000. 2022 to 2023 claims 79,151 as opposed to 118,540. Then 2023 to 2024 they claim 79,808, which should be 127,810. If your eyebrows are raised at these huge sums of salary, I certainly agree with you. But the part that becomes a little bit interesting again is that we've got another office where we have the first year of labour to consider as well. So here's the numbers for them. In terms of their period of 2024 to 25, they claim the average salary is 73,855, which would be a drop, wouldn't it? And it's also then slightly mirrored in the real figure of 126,578. Bless them, how will they ever cope? Distinct possibility that partially the responsible situation for that little drop is that they added one more member to the grossly already overpaid 37 that were there before, and so it went from 37 to 38 employees. Hard life, isn't it? Now, I do know that the number under the fake Conservatives had the salaries going down in 2022-23, but then so did the operating costs, and then in the following year the overall taxpayer burden went down again, because that's what it is, it's a taxpayer burden. But they put the salaries back up to the highest level possible. So, irrespective of what the fake Conservatives have done, we've got a second report now under Labour, and what we do get is a taxpayer burden that's gone up and average salaries have gone down. Only 2 reports so far, but we do have a pattern to keep a watch on straight away. So all of the things that you get in terms of rhetoric for the Conservatives, and then the rhetoric that you get from the Labour, as with lots of other things these days, it's just, let's just turn that one on its head, shall we, so nobody knows what's what, as opposed to just thinking, well, they're all just arseholes really, aren't they? Anyway, obviously the standout then has got to be this high average salary, and in terms of why my calculation is different to theirs, I suspect that their claim will be that when I do the average salary, I include all of the staff costings. And so that means I will include how much they put into the pensions and then the national insurance and so forth. Because when you get your salary slip, it still has those numbers included within it. It's not just about what is your base salary, and then how much it is that you take home. There's all the staffing costs as well that go into it. Otherwise, you're not really going to be able to then move into calculations of the cost of employment. What I dare say they will try to suggest is that they're going on what they consider to be salary alone. Problem being with that is that even when you calculate the average salary on those numbers, using the last year of labour as the example, they're still wrong. And they're not even a little bit wrong, but they're out by about 20,000. So, no, any sort of comeback on that perspective wouldn't work either. Now, obviously there'll be some further additional claim about the higher positions with the higher salaries that tend to skew the numbers, and there is some reality to that. But a team that has just got at the end there 38 people, it's not going to have that dramatic a shift. But having said that, we can just simply take an understanding of this guy here. I mean, my God, they always look like this, don't they? This is the CEO, and his name is John Russell, and you won't be surprised to know that he gets paid 365k. And he worked for Ofwat, you know, those brilliant people that regulate the water industry so well. And he also had a stint at the Treasury. So, you know, obviously very well qualified for this. It's like I mean, these public sector workers, I mean, it's not just him. If you go to their website and that, and you have a look at all of the so-called senior executive team, they look at exactly what you would expect them to look like. And all of the money in the world really doesn't help them. So, you know, there are small mercies as far as that's concerned. Anyway, I'll come back to the pay side of things at a little bit towards the back end of this. Won't be too long this time. Not as long as the population video anyway. So in terms of what we're talking about here, and that the single source regulations office, obviously what this refers to, or what it should be referring to, which is another problem we'll go into, it's about purchasing into the MOD, and whereby the people that you are purchasing from, or the organisations that you're purchasing from, are external to normal competitive processes. Now, I have kind of referred to this sort of situation before in terms of the issues that we have around procurement anyway. But producing or taking care of the kind of contracts that you would expect to be looking at for the MOD, it's not exactly going to be as per the other forms of procurement system, because, like I say, you do end up with dealing with organisations whose entire focus is providing to the military. It's not as if they're selling into the private sector. You'd kind of hope. That should be kind of a bit of a part of the regulation there, but you know. Anyway, apparently these 38 people then are responsible for the framework of the contracts that they're supposed to be regulating and presumably taking forward and ensuring are conducted according to process. Again, Grant, I'll mention another little thing about that in a short while. Now, we could have a wider discussion as to the issues about procurement because like I say, I have brought it up before, and how it's very much become more a system of a barrier to entry, where they do tend to be actually looking towards the entire public sector procurement system as a single source of procurement. But in the wider discussion, I had pretty much stated that anybody that has been building up a company on the basis of thinking that they should enter into the bidding process of being a supplier for government, I think that they should just say, no, you're all right, thanks. I'm not interested. I know that from a sheer money perspective, lots of organisations get their heads turned, but I think you're far better off, and the country would be far better off if you just turned around and said, no thanks. But it is what it is. But naturally, if your company and your business and what it is that you've produced is based around something that is suited to the defence market, then like I say, you're not exactly operating, fundamentally, you're not exactly operating in a private sector market, really. Or like I say, you shouldn't be. And if indeed you are a single source supplier, it does then need some serious consideration and breakdown, because if you are going to be considered a single source supplier, you have to be able to avoid areas where there can be some muddy waters, shall we say. And the muddy waters are not really necessarily based on whether you're providing into the defence sector. It's based around, are you actually single source, and do you originate from another country? Is your supply chain based on other countries and potential threats from that? There's a range of different areas that need to be considered on this. But to give you an idea of who we're talking about realistically, this is a sample from a document called the MOD Trade Industry and Contracts 2024. And it's worth taking a look at, because directly underneath is a link to some supporting data where you can find a relatively extensive spreadsheet of the suppliers and the types of money that's involved. But what you can notice directly from this particular graphic is it does include a number of international companies. And so again, this is where discussion is actually needed in terms of what constitutes a single source supplier. There is a particular part of historical reference here and that where I do want to have a little bit of caution in terms of suggesting that literally everything has to be done domestically, because just in case for any of those that are still not aware, despite the fact that it should be bloody obvious by now when you hear about it enough as it is. But yes, 1930s German economic rebound was based on the having a command and control system, a bit like ours, and then shifting the production towards militarization. If you bring that up to date, you might notice that the EU is doing a very distinct attempt in trying to replicate that. Make of that what you will. But keep in mind the direction of travel in the UK as well. It does become a difficult thing to say, well, if we look towards a concentration of domestic organisations feeding into defence, are you literally replicating 1930s Germany? Are you taking that command and control to the step that you really want to be avoiding? I think there are methods and ways where you don't necessarily have to go quite that lunatic, but again, that's why it's part of a wider discussion. There is one other piece of obvious information from an external source, which is this. Um, there's some considerable bias in this, but when anyone from government is turning around and trying to whine on to the public about how they need to have something like a digital ID because of levels of, to combat against fraud and corruption. Can we just remember that the biggest frauds are within government itself? And just to be clear as well, now, it's not specific to this office that I'm talking about, nor to the MOD either. It's across government. So if we've got our biggest problem of fraud being focused on government and public sector, they're the problem, not the general public. It's not us that need any digital IDs. It's stopping government itself being corrupt. But then we also have to give a little bit of consideration to who else it is that we're dealing with and why it is certain payments are being made. Because as I mentioned, that there was a spreadsheet where I've just taken a little bit of information from it. I do have to ask questions. I understand that you have certain suppliers that come from the US, and it's not necessarily a bad thing to have that kind of relationship with US companies. But in order for that to take place, I'm somewhat suspicious of the fact that why do we have to be paying the US government £973 million for that? Now, obviously, I'd rather be dealing with the United States than the socialist lunatics in the European Union, especially on account of the fact that they're the ones that have kept on invading us. The US hasn't. But I'm not too sure that I want to be paying for the privilege of that. Surely just buying from the company should be enough. So I'd like to have further sort of investigations into this sort of thing. I'd ask why is Estonia being paid 11 million? What have they got to do with anything? It's NATO farce. No longer a defensive organisation. Hasn't been since it decided to go in and start bombing the former Yugoslavia. But they've got 3 separate payments being made here, equating to 450 million. Now, can we understand that NATO is just simply a bureaucratic office? Why are we paying NATO 450 million? I don't understand these areas of potential fraud. Is somebody turning and saying, "Oh, you can be my friend if I give you this money"? What's that all about exactly? I'd like to see a breakdown of reasons why this sort of money is going through to these different countries, including the obvious, the likes of your French government bastards. But then why City of Westminster? What do they need to be paid 14 million for? Is that 14 million, I think? What the hell do they need to be paid for? There's some strange movements of money here. But when we're looking at an issue in the UK that's claiming nearly 1 billion in fraud from this particular source alone, essentially you have a few things that you can understand. A, you know this is but a fraction of the true number. B, you shouldn't really be taking the word of somebody from the Labour Party who wants to conveniently only put out information between 2010 and 2024, and then naturally giving the criminal Blair a distinct free pass. But again, C is that when you have these kinds of numbers being bandied around, why does any politician seem to think that they've got the bare ass cheek to be turning around and saying, we need to be clamping down on the general public about fraud and corruption when it is quite literally obvious who the biggest frauds are. I mean, this is a truly dishonest and disgusting piece of projection on their part. But let's give a little bit more consideration. Here we get the infographic, which is the, as per usual from the annual reports, the sort of, here's what I did during my summer holidays type of thing. Aren't I a wonderful person? And yes, I am being sarcastic. What I want you to do here and that is focus on the acronyms in the title, which are the QDCs and the QSCs. And then you get the number of each type of contract stated underneath it, whereby the QSCs make up for 16% of all the contracts that they want to pat themselves on the back for. So let me just inform you of what each one of these acronyms stand for. So you've got the QDC, which is qualifying defence contract, and then you've got a QSC, which is a qualifying subcontract. Bit of a basic problem here, really, and I do wonder if you've spotted it yet, considering what the name of this office is. How is it that anyone can possibly be a subcontractor in a single source supplier system? I mean, just by default and simple logic, how is that possible? There's another problem though. So this is the framework that they use for developing these contracts that they're so pleased for themselves about. And the key word here is framework. So you can have certain regulatory obligations whereby, in the context of military, ensuring that you're not buying from enemies is going to be one of them, or having a supply chain from your enemies is another one. You know, these are fairly basic functions, really. But there's another problem altogether, and the simple fact is any contract is going to be, by default, having certain levels of being able to operate within the framework, but each and every contract will have certain levels of flexibility over specific terms. When you're dealing with organisations like this, it is as rare as rocking horse shit that two contracts would be the same. The organisation that you're dealing with is going to be different, the needs are going to be different, what you're being supplied with is going to be different, the timescale of delivery is going to be different, etc., etc. The particular areas of innovation within that are going to be different. Now, I'm not going to be going into a huge amount of detail on this, but it is something that I do have a bit of experience in, and I have worked on a couple of military contracts in the past. And so I do know this to be absolutely true. You have to have proper conversations with the military guys and that to figure out exactly what the contract is supposed to be all about. But the one thing that I do notice from this so-called framework, and that is distinctly missing, is where's the due diligence section? Because when I've done the military contracts before and that, it's not been with the UK military, it's been with the Japanese and the Americans. And due diligence is a distinctly important part of it. They want to know who the shareholders are. Are they, in the case of America, are the shareholders American based? If you're not, you have to go through a process in order to become certified to be able to, for that company to be able to continue with the contract. Nothing of that nature stated within this framework. That doesn't make a great deal of sense. Or there should at least be something that is something that provides an outline as to which particular nations. There should be a list of nations as to who you are actually allowed to talk to. What's the red list, so to speak? So something like that is missing. But when it comes down to the flexibility part, of course, I don't expect them to be having those flexibility conditions on the website, because that is supposed to be a private and a very specific discussion with the company involved. But what you tend to not want to do is have a consultation about it. This is literally something that is ongoing right now. And some of the questions that they've got in there are a little bit beyond belief. I mean, this is literally an office being paid an absolute bloody fortune that are quite clearly so bad at their job that they want to have a consultation. And let's face it, what that means in this particular instance, especially, basically means, can the invested parties tell us how to do our job? If you have something like this going on, perhaps you've got the wrong people in the office. Because a lot of this is based around, should we give you access to more money or not? Guess what the answer is going to be there. This is effectively, in many ways, I would suggest, taking all of the fraud and corruption that goes on and trying to make it acceptable. Seems like it to me. I find this pretty telling, to say the least. So there's a whole load of additional comments that I could make in this regard, and based on single source suppliers, who we should be looking towards buying from, how the innovation cycle should work, all these kinds of areas. But in all honesty, I mean, I think I did pretty much cover a great deal of this when I did the 6-part review of their military strategy review. I didn't go into full detail of absolutely everything, because I've kind of indicated that I'd like to understand the MOD as a whole before I make those kinds of comments. But I do think that there absolutely does need to be much more focus on domestic supply. I do certainly think that offices like this single source regulatory office need to be staffed by people that aren't just promoted civil servant retards that have just been shoved to the next stage of their gravy train. But then I also think that this sort of shit, that sort of level of suicidal stupidity, should not be taking place either. Right alongside things like, for some reason, the UK taxpayer has to be paying for German rearmament, something that I discussed during that review process. And I also don't think we should be giving all of our army equipment to Ukraine. Little things like that. So the total lack of awareness that you see from some of these morons that sit in these offices and in the so-called offices in Parliament and what have you, that is probably the greatest problem of all, is that you just got stupidity at every single level. Certain areas of influence ensuring that stupidity continues, wouldn't be surprised if that's taking place. But when it is as blatantly obvious as it is, then yeah, there's certainly something. There's something that whoever it is that is thinking of taking our house back, you might want to have a good think about this sort of stuff. I did also say that I'd come back to the salary levels conversation. Now, naturally, I don't think the current idiots are obviously worth the. Actually, I don't think these people and that are worth minimum wage, let alone getting 360,000. But I do understand the argument for higher pay scales in order to ensure that it removes the incentive for corruption. But again, the problem is these public sector workers are just overtly corrupt and incompetent. And so, I mean, I would favour a competent person being paid well, perhaps not quite as well as what these idiots are getting. But that would be also based on the fact that what you're dealing with with a single source procurement system is how unique it is realistically, because when you do get certain areas of corruption, it's not as if it's going to be hard to spot, is it? Or it certainly shouldn't be. I mean, they're going to have to be dealing with. I mean, yeah, it does seem to be the case that everybody's just willfully blind to things. But when you understand what the values that have been agreed and whether you are actually getting value for money and all of the rest of it, it's pretty fucking easy to spot where the corruption will have taken place. You're going to notice that the person that is supposed to have been running the contract is suddenly splashing the cash, so to speak. But then at the same time, why would a company that is already single source, i.e. nobody else can provide it, they don't have to bribe anybody because they're already the single source. What on earth would be the incentive to bribe somebody? I've got the contract because I'm the only person that can provide this to you. What do I need to give you money for? It's a farce. So making sure that somebody's being paid sufficiently to make sure that they can't be bribed, those options are pretty much narrowed down, really, aren't they, when it comes down to single source, or what should be single source, hence going back to the problem of the fact that these people are putting subcontractors in there. Absolutely idiotic. Again, that alone dictates that you're talking about people that don't know what they're doing. It's just utterly farcical. Like I said, I mean, when you're dealing with something that is based on, right, okay, a really genuine, competent person should be rewarded as per their level of competence. Don't have a problem with that. But the amount of competence that's required in this particular sort of instance is not really all that complicated. And these buggers can't even manage that. Like I say, some excuses that can be put forward and that are really not that difficult to tear down. So I do have some issues with this office, as I generally tend to do. So I think that'll pretty much do for it. I mean, feel free to, again, have a look at the office and see some of the different types of bullshit narrative and documents that they put out there that try to make them seem like they're more important than they are. Most of it's a waste of space. But have a look and see if you think that there's something else that I should have paid attention to. Like I say, overview audit at this particular level. So what that does with the financials of the offices that I've covered under the MOD so far, we're still in a position where the total amount of the offices and that are putting us into a net contribution basis, just for the benchmark year, And what I can say is that when I do present the larger scope of the 5 years, we will see that that isn't the case in every single year. But like I say, I'll do that towards the end. In terms of policies, I'm not going to be so ignorant as to suggest that we're dealing with a situation where I'm so fully informed on this office that I should say, right, okay, we need to remove it completely. I think there is a possibility that that is something that could be considered, but it needs consideration beyond what it is that I'm dealing with here. And so effectively what we are looking at is something that needs to just sort of go into review and reform and see if we could actually turn it into a properly functioning operation. And obviously that means getting rid of all of the useless people that are in there at the moment. But essentially what we do need to do, as I alluded to within that strategy review series, the 6-part series that I did, we really do need to have a proper conversation about what the supply chain into the military looks like. But as I'll give some consideration to that when I get to the end of the audit of the MOD as a whole. So I suppose the one thing that I should say realistically, in that in terms of detailed propositions and detailed proposals, well, keep in mind I've got the political landscape and the policy development as part of the company offer these days. And considering you have retards that don't know what they're doing getting paid 360k, yeah, I don't really see why I should jump too far, put two feet straight into it and just provide everything for nothing. I'll give away a certain amount of information as to what should be done for the policy developments, but yeah, I think it's more than fair to say I'll only go so far before saying you might want to chuck a couple of quid in the pot before you get the full amount of information. And quite frankly, I wouldn't even have to jump that far into it, because how bad it is at the moment and how obviously bad it is, it wouldn't take much for me to be able to put things together that would have a dramatic effect. So that's one for whoever it is that deals with these things. Link to the website's at the bottom of the page there. Be a link in the description. Open to offers. And I think that will do it for this week. If there is anybody that does seriously think about that sort of stuff, by the way, also have a look at the teaser document, because that'll give you a bit of an idea as to, not the full extent, but how I actually start to frame things out a little bit and that into wider considerations. So, with that little plug aside, I think that'll do it. I don't think I'm going to be doing another video until next week. And so, yeah, I guess I'll call it a day there, and cheers. Have a good week. See you next time. Bye-bye.